Hi. So I've had to re-upload some videos, or rather, discard some videos because there were sound issues. Um, just a kind of disclaimer: every update I make on the coronavirus is likely to already be out of date, such as the pace that this thing is developing. So when I talk about a particular update, um, it's already old news by the time the video is uploaded. But as it stands, we have had now almost 23,000 cases in the UK, and as of today, that is the 30th of March, 1,408 dead, I believe. So it's going up by about 180 to 200 people per day, which is a slower rate than Spain, but still very serious. So that's as it stands. Worldwide, there are over 700,000 cases and over 30,000 dead. So that's the situation. My city, Sunderland, that's the whole city, including Washington, Houghton Spring, and Heaton Hall for anyone who lives in this area. We have 76 cases. I don't know how many deaths so far. Um, right, so I want to talk about culture. This is kind of an extension of the video I was discussing Asia's wet markets. I think one interesting thing about this is, had you said something like this a few months ago, people would have said, oh, you're being bigoted, you're being racist. But now there is more of a consensus. There's more of a recognition that it's not racist, it's just common sense. I don't care if it's an aspect of Chinese or Vietnamese or Thai culture or other countries that get involved in these sort of wet markets. Um, I frankly don't care. What we have seen as a side effect of this, a very, very big side effect, is a global pandemic. And that has specifically happened because of the lax safety standards, hygiene safety standards. But in the case of China, also the government's cover up. And I think they have to answer to that. Um, but just thinking of the wider issue of culture, I've been coming across some videos. It's kind of a phenomenon in South Korea called mukbang or mukbang. You may be familiar with this. Basically, it's a sort of cyber trend. I mean, this presumably has only existed since the rise of the internet and YouTube, because the whole idea of this is to publicize the fact that you're eating. Now, I don't particularly like watching people eat anything. Okay, I just don't like the sound of eating. It's a human necessity. We all have to eat, but it's not. I don't understand the appeal with these sort of videos. I think they're disgusting, to be quite honest. The sound, the sight. I don't know what it's meant to, what the picture's meant to be. But what I find particularly revolting in more than way than one is when you get these videos. Usually, they're attractive young women, so that's significant because we can't just dismiss it as, oh, well, they're uneducated peasants. These are usually presumably educated young people, often, like I say, attractive young women. Presumably, there's meant to be some sort of aesthetic thing going on here, like models are used, for example, to promote products. Well, in a similar way, you get these young women who look like normal people, but then what are they doing? They're eating live animals. I mean, it's disgusting. It's disgusting both to look at, but also ethically. These are living creatures. So this culture, I'm sorry, South Korea, but eating live octopi, it's disgusting. And if that offends you, so be it. These are live creatures, and it's absolutely. Actually, there is a bit of historic background to this. Film Old Boy, which I believe was released in 2003, has a scene where the lead character eats a live octopus. So whether that kind of triggered this trend or not, because there was an American remake, I don't know. I can't remember if I've seen both films. I can't remember if they show the octopus scene in the American remake or not. But what I'm driving at here is, just because something is a culture doesn't mean it's above criticism. I have a big problem with that because you can use culture to justify just about anything. And if you want to say, oh, this is, the West is X, Y, and Z, I still say it's false equivalency to try and suggest that there is the same animal welfare standards. No, the West is far, far ahead of Asian countries when it comes to animal welfare. That is a verifiable fact because of regulations that we have in place, because those regulations are imposed. Um, so I'm sorry, but people who say, "Oh, but it's just the same," that's bullshit. It's not just the same. Um, but if an octopus, particularly, these are smart creatures. They're not really primitive creatures. They are quite smart. I mean, there was that octopus that was used in the 2016 World Cup, I believe it was, in Germany, that was actually predicting scores. So these animals have cognitive thinking. So for people to eat them while they're alive, it's basically torture. And if calling it torture offends you and you're doing it, fuck you. I don't care. Okay. In the West, we do have animal cruelty. We have, for example, like gangs that engage in illegal dog fighting. But the point is, it's illegal. Okay, and the vast majority of the public, like 99% of people, are disgusted by that. Now, fox hunting was a tradition in this country, an old tradition, and unfortunately, there are some people in rural areas that still support it, but it's technically illegal. I think the police need to do more to enforce it, but again, the majority of the public are against it. So I'm not going to say most Koreans support this tradition of eating live animals, but simply said, "Oh well, it's cultural differences. Respect all cultures equally." It's a bullshit statement. We can extend this to human rights. I mean, you cannot tell me that a culture that believes a woman who has been the victim of rape should be punished for adultery, as is the case in some Gulf states. You cannot tell me that is equal to societies that recognize rape for what it is. Forcefully imposing sex on another person. You cannot tell me that cultures that say if a woman, in some cases men, but mostly women, dishonor the family, then they deserve to have acid thrown in their face. You cannot tell me that is equal to societies that find that repulsive. And this is not to say that every single person in Pakistan or China or any other country does the same thing. I'm not saying that because that would be racist. Generalizing an entire group of people is where racism lies. But criticizing a specific culture is not racist. And I hate this idea that the reactionary left often make. And it isn't everyone on the left, just certain reactionary people say, "Oh, you can't say that, it's racist." There may be aspects of British culture that people don't like. Well, I may or may not defend it, but I'm not going to say, "Oh, you're being racist against Britain." Say, for example, we have a problem with overseas football fans behaving badly. Not as much as the past, but it is a problem. In the 70s, it was called the English disease because football hooliganism was such a big problem back then. It was kind of a social, cultural thing. But most British people, denounced it. But it was something that was particularly notorious in this country. It's a problem in Turkey and Russia and Egypt and other parts of the world. But within Europe, the British, apart from maybe the Italians, were particularly notorious. So if people said, "Oh, you British always behave badly overseas," I would say, well, you can't generalize. We're not all like that. However, I recognize there is a problem. You're not entirely wrong. Because there are British tourists who behave very badly. They get drunk and make an ass out of themselves, and they do disrespect other countries. I don't deny that. But because that can be recognized, I don't see what's wrong with saying, well, there's aspects of other cultures, for example, I personally dislike. I think when you're traveling, you need to adapt. You need to recognize that you're in another society. So I wouldn't go to the Gulf states, for example, and openly swig back a beer. I wouldn't go to Vietnam or China and say, publicly say, "Oh, by the way, I think your wet markets are disgusting." I wouldn't do that because I'm in their country. However, that doesn't mean you have to like the culture. I think you can obey laws and understand the culture without necessarily liking it. Thailand, the lèse majesté laws. You could go to jail for 15 years for insulting majesty. Now, to me, that's a barbaric attack on freedom of expression, and it definitely is a problem for Thai democracy. And many Thais agree with that, but many others get very angry when you point it out. So, what I would say is if I'm in Thailand, I'll respect the laws. I won't insult majesty, I won't even question it. But outside of Thailand, I reserve the right to say what the hell I like, because that's what freedom of expression is about. It's about being able to vocalize your conscience without threatening people. That includes the right to say things that may be offensive. That people may choose to find them offensive is up to them. But if there are certain cultural things that I do not like, I'm not going to be silent in my own country in saying, I find wet markets disgusting, I find honour crimes appalling, and I find certain attitudes to women and gay people around the world absolutely repugnant. That's not to say my country is perfect. It's not to say that you can't find things in British society or Canadian society or Western society that deserve condemnation. Of course you can. I mean, a particular problem in Britain is binge drinking. The number of times I've got on public transport and had to deal with, drunk idiots. That's not something you would see in a country like Singapore. So in that sense, I say they're ahead of us. They do some things better than us. So every society has its pros and cons. What I'm saying is it's a pretty pathetic argument to say it's racist to say that you dislike a particular aspect of culture. Racism, to me, is holding prejudice against someone. So let's say, for instance, Chinese or Vietnamese or Arab person came to the UK, I said, "Oh, I'm not going to talk to you because of this barbaric thing that goes on in your country," that would be presuming that they are part of it. You can't generalize people. You can't say everyone's the same. That's where bigotry lies, and that's what I reject. So I just think it's extremely important to differentiate between criticizing regressive culture that abuses animal welfare or human rights versus generalizing all people from a society. And I'm sick and tired of seeing the media, in particular race bait, and make it out to be a racial thing. I mean, not to track too far here, but I recall the Metro newspaper had this pathetic headline that said, racist incident on tube, but it was something about basically a British guy was confronting this Polish man who was drinking. That's against the rules. There's clear signs that say no drinking on board. The Polish guy got very aggro and very sort of, oh, we take fight outside, yeah. Just really bad attitude. The British guy, you might argue, should have minded his own business, but having been on trains that do have this problem where you get people just drinking, and a lot of Britons do it, the idea that it's racist to confront that, I would say the British guy in this video was being a good citizen. And it kind of disgusts me that Metro newspaper was smearing him as a racist simply because he was calling it out. Now, the fact that he was bringing nationality into it maybe was misguided. Maybe he shouldn't have said, I'm born and bred here. He did say that. That's maybe not the right rhetoric to use. But the fundamental point about that video, just look it up, British guy, Polish guy, something like that. I forget the exact title. But anyway, the point is the Polish man was deliberately ignoring local laws. So he was disrespecting the country that he's in. We wouldn't go to Poland and behave any way we like and not expect repercussions. So, for instance, if you get British jobs who go to Warsaw or Łódź and they behave like animals, they're going to be arrested. And I've no sympathy with them. I would salute the Polish police for arresting them. So I don't see why, when it comes to cultural standards or when it comes to laws, we should, sort of have this attitude of not demanding that people do respect our culture. Why is it always the onus on Western countries to respect other cultures? Why is there never an onus on people from other parts of the world having to respect Western culture? Why? Because we're diverse societies, because we're multicultural societies? State multiculturalism is a failure. This is not to say oh, let's pull up the drawbridge and we all look inward. That is not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is we must ascertain our own values. People say that British values is a vague term. I agree, it needs to be clearly defined, but certain things are a no-brainer. In British culture, British values, we do not believe that a woman who has been raped, has brought shame to her family and she needs to be punished. Maybe in the past, maybe in the distant past, but not today. This needs to be understood. So the Afghan migrant who threw acid in his wife's face because she wasn't wearing her burqa, this happened in Shropshire a few years ago. Um, he should never have been allowed into this country. I strongly believe that values really are an important part of integration. It isn't just about obeying de facto laws; it's also about your attitude. And I believe if you come to a country, you have to be open-minded. You cannot. I mean, this applies to British people as well. So when I see fellow Britons, and I have seen this, go abroad and kind of be very arrogant and say, "Oh, everyone should speak in English to please me," I say, "No, we're in their country. We need to respect the local culture. You try speaking their language." So I personally know I'm consistent about this. I know that when I've travelled, I've respected whichever country that I'm in. I may not have liked everything, but I've respected it insofar as obeying the laws and in terms of, um, well, let me rephrase that, not respecting so much as understanding and being practical. So if any part of this video has offended you, I'm sorry about that. Well, I'm not really sorry. That's just the way it is. We need to really just say this is a case of mutual respect, and in my opinion, too much of the time, it's imposed on Western countries to respect other cultures, but we are not insistent enough that other cultures respect us and understand that certain things are not tolerated here or shouldn't be tolerated. And it's not racist to say that. It infuriates me how the politically correct brigade always turn everything into racism. Like, oh, I'm worried about nationalism and people are being defensive and people are being hostile to outsiders. I don't like jingoism. I have friends from around the world and I would always welcome them to this country. I wouldn't want them to feel like they are not welcome. Um, but frankly, the more the PC brigade, push forward this ridiculous message, like the current Labour Party, for example, it's utterly pathetic how they punish Sir Trevor Phillips. I'm disgusted by that. In fact, um, they're showing moral cowardice in that sense. They're not standing up for Western liberal democratic values at all. Um, this is just a case of it's a two-way street. Okay, I understand that coming to the UK, there are people who pay a lot of money and they go through a lot of paperwork. I understand that. And by the way, when I'm talking about integration, I'm not saying you have to totally divorce yourself from your own culture. So there was a thing on Facebook recently, a lady from Singapore, I believe it was Singapore, she was talking about her sort of crisis with dual identity because the Singapore government doesn't recognise that, the British government does. The only thing I would say about that is I understand, people have, if they have another heritage, they want to hold on to part of that. But she would sort of ask in an open question, what should I do? But the thing is, she was kind of putting the onus on the British side, like, why should I have to change? The thing is, the British side is more flexible. It does allow for two nationalities. It's just the Singapore government didn't. So if you, for example, are a Chinese national and you marry a British person, um, you can be a British and Chinese citizen in the eyes of the British government, but the Chinese government would revoke your Chinese citizenship. So I do sympathise with people with that sort of dilemma because, you know, in the modern world, people often do have more than one identity. However, I don't have much time for people who come to the UK or any other country and they basically don't make any attempt to kind of endorse a culture or other aspects of the country that they're in, and they try to create a little microcosm of their own society. Now, I understand the irony with this coming from a British guy because we colonized the world. So definitely we have to be careful with this because, we colonized the world, we had our influence all over the world. So we also have to sort of recognize that. However, that was the past. Um, and today is today. This is all relevant actually because this coronavirus thing could change a lot. I believe it could change every aspect of society, including even immigration issues. So I just think that when it comes to culture, it's all very well saying, oh, let's all cultures are equal and let's all celebrate all cultures. That's just a very, very naive thing to say. Because if you have any conscience at all, and you're saying you respect every culture, it's one thing obeying local laws and understanding different cultures, or at least accepting that they exist. But if, for example, you're a vegan and you say, oh, I respect every culture, I would say you're being insincere. How can you, as a vegan or vegetarian, support cultures that boil dogs alive? I'm not saying that most vegans say that, but all I know is that I am consistent. When I'm in another country, I obey the laws, and I won't just try to make a little mini Britain. I will go out, I will talk to people, I'll try and get involved in local activities, etc. I believe that people who come here need to do that. Otherwise, they can't really complain. You can't come to Britain and create a little mini version of your own country, only speak to people from your country, and then complain that the British are hostile. Some British people do have a bad attitude. They do have, unfortunately, a racist attitude. But by the same token, there are people that come here and don't, they kind of see Britain as, oh, well, I'm only working here. That's the only, and I don't have to respect the culture. Well, actually, maybe in law you don't have to respect the culture, but I would say you can't complain if you're coming here and you're sort of taking the attitude, oh, well, I'm only here to work. Yeah, but if you're here for quite a while, you need to accept that it's for everyone's sake. It's for your sake as well, because if you're in a country for a long time, it makes things a lot easier for you if you actually respect the country that you're in and actually try to get involved in things. It may be that you have dealt with some bigotry, and I will always sympathize with people who are in that position. However, if they're just not making an effort, and then it's all British people are unfriendly, I'm thinking, well, do you get involved? Do you take opportunities? These are important points. It's as simple as, you know, respect is a two-way street. That applies all over the world. And I just think that the West, in some ways, Western liberal democracies give a bit too much ground under the guise of tolerance. Because of this buzzword tolerance, then we have to turn a blind eye to things that are going on. And when they are raised, these politically correct idiots, like is going on in the Labour Party right now, they yell racism. Where there's actual racism, where individual people are being given a hard time simply because of their ethnicity or because of where they're from. That's wrong. Okay, that's racism. But insisting that there is such a thing as integration, as values, and insisting that people respect our country is not racist. And it infuriates me when people suggest that it is. It just isn't.